I mean, I would be delighted if there's not an interim deal. I think it's extremely likely, and I think it's going to be one of two things. I think we might squeeze into the European Economic Area, the Norway solutions as it's called, which of course doesn't include agriculture, so we've still got a problem there. And we've been there for 4 or 5 or 6 years where we negotiate something sensible. Or we have a really hard Brexit, which will hit us straight between the eyes across all sorts of sectors, and then I think we would take 2 years to negotiate a free trade deal. It is really important to understand that actually it's equally as valuable for the EU to have a deal with us, or nearly as equally, as we are to have a deal with the EU. So one would hope we would have grounds for agreement. Well, I think that it's likely to be softened slightly because of the smaller majority for the Tory party, and of course farmers tend to be Tory voters, so they will not be kicked particularly hard. Having said that, I think it's absolutely clear that the existing subsidy arrangement will no longer exist. Subsidies will be completely disconnected from land. They're likely that will be reduced, even though there's a promise to maintain the support in general agriculture. It won't be in the same form, and it looks quite likely that the proposal, as a few amongst others have made, that the subsidy will divert towards improving productive capacity and diversification. But the subsidy we know and love for just owning farmland is likely to be reduced, and I think it will be phased out over a period of time. It's very interesting. Both colours of politicians have been anti what the EU would call Pillar 1 support. They've always been against it. Partly, I think, because our farm scale is bigger than most of Europe. We're the second biggest. We get the second largest subsidy per farmer anywhere in Europe, and the government has felt they had other priorities other than support farmers, of whatever colour. So yes, it is an agenda, and I certainly think what they can do is reduce the bureaucracy massively, which will of course cheer up everybody, I mean, including farmers. So no crop diversification, no EFA, a very simple application form. But I think in exchange for that, there will be a change in support. And I think over a period of time, I think there's no doubt about it, agricultural support in the UK will reduce a long way for most sectors. It might be that they will divert more subsidy claimed to be for environmental reasons to beef and sheep farmers, and there will still be public goods subsidies, I mean, certainly. Yes, well, the one everybody comes to mind is New Zealand, and of course it depends on whether you use it as a good example or a bad example, depends on how you set it up. One is that New Zealand didn't have subsidies for that long, and they had a big devaluation, but nonetheless a country that's very similar to ours in many, many ways, agriculturally, with less advantages than we have because the population is far lower, so your opportunities to get money from your near market is much harder. New Zealand has to export to maintain a business, which means a lower price because of the transport costs, whereas the UK tends to be net importers, and we have a big urban population. So New Zealand lost their subsidies. Most New Zealand farmers now will say it's the best thing that's ever happened. Their market orientation, their productivity, their care, their return on investment, all the skill of farming has become that much greater. For some sectors, actually not so much the arable sector, the tariffs are a big impact because they're very high. They're 50% on a number of goods, 100% on sugar. So they have this scope to radically change the price of goods. Of course, tariffs largely would increase prices, but there is the other side of the coin, is that if we remove tariffs altogether or reduce them, we will have access to our markets from some of the lowest cost producers in the world. So maybe hormone beef would come in at a lower price, undercutting our existing beef market. So it's mixed, it goes both ways, it depends on your sector, it depends what you're doing. Well, I think the easy one, which is a bit of cop-out really to some extent, is diversification, and I think that means that you've got a parallel income stream, but you must be careful not to take your eyes off the main business. I do think people need to be much more careful on investment, and I think they need to understand what their risk is. I think understanding the risk is actually really important. So don't just assume that things will continue as they were, because they may not. But diversification, and basically all the things that consultants have been saying forever, get the business in order, make sure your business is as good as it can be. Ask yourself the question, what is my competitive advantage compared with my neighbour? Why should I be farming rather than my neighbour? And it's actually a really good, genuine question. And if you can't answer it, maybe it's time to think about doing something else.